Honors Algebra 2 Pre-Calculus. We're doing 1.4 in Algebra 2, which is talking about direct variation and proportion. So a quick note about the other two videos. So I frequently teach you things out of order when I think that they naturally fall in sequence. So I wanted to catch this before it becomes an issue because I know this is early in our course and I might not have mentioned it before. You don't technically see inverse, joint, and combined variation until we get to 8.1 in Algebra 2, which is going to happen usually sometime in late December or early January. But it makes sense to introduce them at the same time as direct variation. So one of my complaints with your textbook, and with most high school textbooks, is that sometimes they introduce sort of the tip of an iceberg and not the full topic. Now, that's not to say that anything in mathematics really gives you the full topic. I mean, algebra, as you learn it in high school, is only, even when you get really in-depth in Algebra 2, is still only the tip of the iceberg to, like, college-level algebra or how very complicated algebra can get. So that's not to say that I think that your textbook should give you everything all at once. It is to say that sometimes I will introduce a concept that you're not going to see until a later section because, to me, it makes mathematical and logical and teaching sense to introduce it at the same time. So I think introducing the vocabulary for the different kinds of variation at the same time makes sense. The same table I gave you in the previous, in the first video of section 1.4 is going to show up when we do 8.1. Maybe not exactly the same table because I'll be drawing it differently or whatever, but the same basic information. So I think it makes more sense to introduce you to concepts in a more holistic way earlier and then revisit them when we get to them later. So don't panic if something I tell you isn't in a particular section of homework or isn't in a... Don't worry about it. It's just that I tend to introduce you to stuff when my brain thinks that it naturally fits in the curriculum, not when the textbook or whoever else tells me thinks it naturally fits. So with that note, moving on. Let's talk about cross products. So on page 31 of the textbook, you'll see something about the cross product property of proportions. So we're given if A over B equals C over D, and then we're given this little aside in parentheses, this little caveat or clarification about the rules. B does not equal 0 and D does not equal 0. We'll talk about that in a sec. Then we know that A times D equals B times C. So that's why it's called a cross product, because you do A times D and B times C, and it looks like a cross, right? So this fundamentally is just a shortcut, sort of like, for those of you that know how to distribute binomials, you know it's an acronym that we say FOIL. That's just a shortcut to help you memorize how to distribute them. This is a shortcut to help you when you have a fraction equal to another fraction. It is worth noting that a proportion is when a single fraction equals another single fraction. If you have multiple fractions on either side, it gets really messy and does not work this way. So really all that's happening, just to be clear, is you're multiplying the B to the other side. Hence, you get B times the C over D, and you're multiplying the D to the other side, so then you get the D over here. So you have an A times a D and a C times a B, and there you go. That's AD equals BC. Let's address this caveat for a second. So whenever you look in a book, usually the important properties or laws are written in some kind of a special box in a textbook in mathematics. Even when you get to college, even when you get past that, very often important facts are written in some like different color or some sort of different font boxed separately on a page. A lot of times when you look at rules, there will be some little extra on the rule that says that, hey, this is true, but it only works in certain situations. So that's a caveat, right? Or a qualification that describes a more specific set of rules. So it's always good to look at these caveats and think, why is that there? Because if you can understand why they have to say that, then you probably have a pretty solid understanding of mathematics. In this case, the reason that these are here is because you're not allowed to divide by 0. And if you notice where both B and D are, they are in the denominator of a fraction. So when you see a little special listing next to a rule, take a minute to say, do I understand why they said that? Because you don't fully understand the information they're giving you unless you can understand why they had to add those special qualifications, okay? So again, in this situation, and a lot of the qualifications you're going to see on properties and theorems and things like that are going to relate to the fact that you can't divide by 0. But I just want to point out that you should make sure you understand how this works and why these little statements are here, because if you can understand the little statements, then that means you have a really good understanding of the math that they're giving you. All right, so we're going to use this cross product property to solve a couple things, and that's where we're going to go. All right, so we should be on example 5 if I'm not counting wrong, although sometimes I count wrong, so if that ever happens, just number it correctly in your notes, knowing that I've numbered it incorrectly in mine. Cool. So let's do an example. So example 5, we're going to solve for x. And we're going to do the same thing in P5. So we're just going to say like E5 because I'm lazy. Cool. All right, so let's do 2x minus 3 over a 7 equals, let's see, what do I want to make that? Oh, let's see. Okay. Let's do x over 4. Sure. We'll see if that works. Sometimes my math is right, sometimes my math is wrong. Okay. So this is a proportion, right? It's a proportion because I have fraction equal to other fraction, right? So if that's the case, if I have a proportion, I'm allowed to cross multiply, which means take a times d, right? So that'll be a 4 times this whole quantity, 2x minus 3. The most common mistake is to forget to multiply the negative 3 as well, equals this product, which would be a 7 times an x, right? So again, the most common mistake is to forget that this binomial needs to be in parentheses. So this is an 8x minus 12 equals 7x. I'm going to move everybody to one side, so I'll subtract the 8x. I get negative 12 equals negative x, so my x is 12. Sweet. And if you wanted to plug in to double check, that's fine. I don't generally make people plug in to check their answers, but if you're afraid that your math is wrong, it's not a bad idea to plug in to check. You can. I don't personally require it. I know some teachers do. If I plugged in, I'd get 24 minus 3 over a 7, which is definitely a 21 over 7, so that's a 3. And over here, I'd get 12 over 4, which is also definitely a 3. So yay, I'm right. But again, I don't generally check my math, and I don't generally make you check your math. Most of the stuff that we do in my class, we do selfishly. So if you choose to check your work, it's because you're concerned you might have been wrong, not because I make sure you do it. All right, let's do a P5. All right, so let's do 3x plus 1 over 8 equals, let's see. So let's make that, we'll do 2x over 5. Sure, okay. So if you want to do this without me, have at it. If you want to do it with me, then go ahead and don't pause me, right? But if you want to do it without me, pause me. All right, so again, this is a proportion, so I can cross multiply. This is a 5 times the quantity, 3x plus 1, equals an 8 times the 2x, right? So that's a 15x plus 5 equals a 16x. When I subtract the 15x over to move my x's to the same side, I get x is 5. And again, if you want to check it, great. If you don't want to check it, also great. If I plugged in x as 5, I'd get 15 plus 1, so that's 16 over 8, which is definitely a 2. And over here, I get 10 over 5, which is also definitely a 2, so I'm definitely right. Again, you check sort of selfishly. You don't have to check because I tell you to. All right, cool. All right.